Welcome to this explainer on the Book of Daniel. Today, we're embarking on a pretty massive journey through one of the absolute most fascinating and complex books of the ancient world. We'll be moving from the heavily political courts of historical Babylon all the way to some truly mind-bending apocalyptic visions. And it's all to answer one burning question: who really holds authority over our world? To make this rich material a bit more digestible, we're going to break this explainer down into 7 distinct sessions, covering everything from the early days of young exiles to a final vision, a prayer, and an angel. So let's dive right in.
Listen to this powerful declaration. It immediately sets the unbelievably high stakes of the Babylonian exile. It answers a profoundly difficult question. How do you actually survive when a hostile empire demands your very soul? You see, the Book of Daniel isn't just a collection of nice Sunday school stories. It's anchored by the deep doctrinal reality of God's total sovereignty over human history. These young men were facing intense, forced assimilation, yet they drew a hard line in the sand.
All right, Session 1, Daniel and the King's Dream, which covers chapters 1 and 2. Here, we meet young Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're taken as captives from Jerusalem and totally immersed into pagan Babylonian culture. The tension really peaks when King Nebuchadnezzar demands his wise men not only interpret a troubling dream he had, but he tells them they have to guess what he dreamed in the first place. Talk about an impossible pop quiz, right? Well, when Babylon's absolute brightest minds fail completely, exposing the real limits of worldly wisdom, it's only God who reveals the vision to Daniel. He sees a massive, glorious statue made of descending, distinct metals.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how these metals map perfectly to 4 successive earthly kingdoms in human history. As Daniel interprets it to the king, that head of gold, that represents Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. Following him will come the silver of the Medo-Persian Empire, then the bronze of the Grecian Empire, and finally, a 4th kingdom of iron and clay, which represents the brutal but ultimately divided Roman Empire. History is unfolding exactly as God foreknew it would.
But here's the best part. The dream doesn't end with human empires. The climax of the vision reveals a stone, one cut without human hands, striking those fragile iron and clay feet and shattering the entire statue. This brilliantly illustrates that God's eternal kingdom will ultimately crush the frail, temporary empires of men, establishing a dominion that will literally never be destroyed. Nebuchadnezzar is so moved by this truth that he elevates Daniel to the highest courts of Babylon.
Moving right along to Session 2, Faithful in the Fire, covering Daniel chapter 3.
We now encounter the ultimate loyalty test for Daniel's friends. Despite Nebuchadnezzar's previous realization about the supremacy of Daniel's God, the king's ego gets the better of him. He issues a terrifying imperial decree: bow down to an enormous golden statue representing his own majesty, or face a blazing, scalding furnace. The empire is attempting to forcefully assimilate them, demanding submission to the king's absolute authority over the God of Israel, but they briefly refuse to forsake their identity or worship a false god. So they are thrown into a furnace so intensely hot that the flames actually kill the guards who threw them in. The king is shocked. He looks into the fire and doesn't see 3 incinerated bodies, he sees 4. 4 men walking around completely unharmed, and that 4th figure, he looks like a divine being. It's an amazing reminder that God doesn't always keep his people out of the fire, but he will absolutely join them right in the middle of it.
Okay, Session 3, Visions of Trees and Writing on a Wall, covering chapters 4 and 5.
This section is pretty much a masterclass in the dangers of pride. King Nebuchadnezzar has another dream, this time of a massive tree providing shelter for the whole earth, which gets suddenly chopped down by a heavenly watcher. Daniel warns the king that the tree is actually him. Well, Nebuchadnezzar ignores the warning, and right as he's boasting about his own mighty accomplishments, the vision is fulfilled. He literally loses his mind. He's driven away from society to live like a wild beast for 7 years. Probably the world's most extreme outdoor diet, until he finally looks up and recognizes God's true overarching sovereignty. Sadly, the lesson didn't stick for the next generation. Years later, King Belshazzar throws this totally sacrilegious feast, drinking wine out of the sacred goblet stolen from the Jewish temple. And judgment is swift and terrifying. A mysterious, floating hand appears and writes a message right on the wall. Daniel is brought in to translate, delivering the grim news: the king has been weighed and found wanting. That very night, Babylon falls to the Medes and Persians.
That brings us to Session 4, Surviving the Lion's Den, covering Daniel chapter 6.
With a totally new empire in charge, Daniel faces his own deadly trial. Jealous political officials, who are completely unable to find any corruption in Daniel's work, decide to target his faith. They trick King Darius into citing an unchangeable 30-day edict banning prayer to anyone but the king. This sets up a direct, unavoidable clash between earthly legislation, the famous law of the Medes and Persians which supposedly could not be repealed, and the supreme, sovereign law of Daniel's God.
And what does Daniel do? He doesn't protest and he doesn't hide. He simply goes home, opens his windows toward Jerusalem, and continues his faithful habit of praying 3 times a day. He gets caught, and a very reluctant King Darius is forced to throw him into the lion's den. But once again, earthly power totally fails to overcome divine protection. God sends his angel to shut the lions' mouths, and Daniel miraculously survives because he implicitly trusted in his God over the state.
Next up, Session 5, One Like a Son of Man, covering Daniel chapter 7. This is where we hit a major thematic pivot. The historical narrative gives way to cosmic prophecy. Amidst a terrifying vision of 4 chaotic, mutant beasts rising from the sea, which represent tyrannical human empires, Daniel sees a distinct, human-like figure approaching God, who is called the Ancient of Days. This figure is described as one like a son of man. Now, that specific phrase has sparked one of history's greatest theological and linguistic debates. Who exactly is this figure?
Well, if we look at the original Aramaic linguistics, the idiom bar enosh basically just meant a human being. It was used here to contrast a humane, righteous figure with the monstrous, beastly empires of men. But over the centuries, through Jewish literature, this descriptive phrase evolved. By the 1st century, it had become the Greek titular phrase ho huios tu anthropou. And what's absolutely vital to note here is that Jesus of Nazareth consistently utilized this specific title to identify himself as the long-awaited Messiah. And it becomes abundantly clear why he claimed that title. The Son of Man isn't just some human champion. He is given everlasting dominion, glory, and a kingdom that encompasses literally all peoples and nations. Unlike the chaotic beasts who boast, fight, and rely on sheer terror for their temporary victories, the Son of Man inherits an effortless victory. It's a victory that flows entirely from the sovereign authority of the Ancient of Days.
Finally, we have Session 6, A Vision, a Prayer, and an Angel, covering chapters 8 and 9, and Session 7, Till the End, covering chapters 10 through 12.
These final chapters peel back the curtain on human history in an incredible way, presenting a truly captivating dual reality. On one hand, we see everyday earthly realities, the empires of Persia and Greece making war and issuing decrees. But Daniel has shown that, parallel to all this, there's an unseen realm of spiritual warfare. Behind the geopolitical maneuverings of earthly kings are massive angelic and demonic battles happening in the heavenly realms. We're talking about figures like the Archangel Michael clashing with demonic princes of earthly nations.
This brilliantly illustrates the real-world impact of faith. In chapter 10, Daniel enters a period of intense prayer and fasting for 21 days. When an angelic messenger finally arrives, he reveals that he was dispatched the very first day Daniel started praying, but he was delayed by a spiritual battle with a demonic prince for exactly 21 days. This proves that Daniel's prolonged prayer wasn't just some therapeutic exercise. It genuinely moved heaven to action and participated in that cosmic struggle.
Which brings us to the core thesis of this entire book. From the blazing furnace to the lion's den, from the mad kings of Babylon to the terrifying visions of mutant beasts, the central takeaway is perfectly clear. History is not random. Despite the terrifying chaos and the overwhelming hubris of earthly rulers, the Ancient of Days is in absolute control. History is steadily marching toward a final culmination of justice, resurrection, and total restoration.
As we look around at the shifting political powers, the cultural pressures, and all the anxieties in our own world today, the book of Daniel serves as both a comfort and a real challenge. It forces us to examine where our ultimate loyalty truly lies. So I want to leave you with this final thought to consider. When the temporary iron and clay empires of this world finally fall, and history shows us they always do, whose eternal kingdom will you be found standing in?